didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
This Jocks 94.5 podcast is brought to you by Millennium Satellite and Video. Log on to msbnow.com. TV excellence everywhere. That's Millennium. McElroy and Cubelic in the morning starts now.
Welcome back in. McElroy and Cubelic in the morning. We will switch gears to American football at 8 a.m. Tuesday, July 7th. Don't forget, you can listen online, jocksfm.com. The app is in your app store, iPhone, Android. Download that for free. Listen on the go. You can watch us live on YouTube each and every morning. Search Jocks945. Or if you're walking around your house, tell your home smart speaker to enable the Jock skill.
Bill Smith Buick GMC is the GMC Dealer of the Year, the national champion of GMC dealers. Just take the short drive up to Coleman. You'll be glad you did. I-65, exit 310, Highway 31. You can get yourself a GMC Sierra 2500. It's a heavy-duty vehicle. It's beautiful. It's a Denali Ultimate. It's an HD, really, really nice truck. $99,030 is the list price. You can get it for $88,000. It's deals like that keep people coming back. There's a reason why 75% of their business is repeat customers. That's because you have a better experience when you shop with Bill Smith. Take the short drive to Coleman. You'll be glad you did. You can also shop online, have it delivered right to your driveway at BillSmithBuickGMC.com.
All right, let's go to the Higginbotham hotline now. George Stoia covers Oklahoma. We had an extended conversation about Oklahoma, but mainly John Mateer yesterday, and George has done a good job diving into some of the things that Mateer has been doing during his off season. George, appreciate you taking some time to join us. What have you been able to learn about some of the things that John Mateer has done differently this off season as opposed to some of the others?
Yeah, I mean, and thanks for having me on, guys. I think that for John, the biggest thing this off season has been two things. One, his throwing mechanics, which I feel like has kind of taken on this national narrative, and whether you believe in the AI pictures that have been put out there of him from the Manning Passing Academy, or some of the things that have been talked about in terms of moving his arm slot up higher and footwork and all of that. He's worked with Josh Allen's quarterback coach, Chris Hess, who's like a biomechanics engineer, and doing all this stuff with his throwing motion. That's been one narrative that's been out there, and he kind of brought that upon himself because he talked about it back in the spring, and I kind of dove into what it looks like now after this summer. And then number two is the film study. And I wrote about that yesterday. That's been his number one focus, is the decision-making. And if you watched Oklahoma last year, his decision-making against some of these teams that they played just wasn't very good. Everybody remembers the pick six that he threw against Alabama there in the college football playoff. And really that play changed the momentum of that game. And so I think that's been a huge focus. He's worked with Brent Venables a lot one-on-one in the film room, as well as now Sam Bradford has kind of reached out and been helping him, as well as obviously Ben Arbuckle, the offensive coordinator, John Kuzieski, his quarterback's coach. But I think for him, that's been more of the number one focus this offseason, is improving his decision-making, because last year it frankly just wasn't good enough down the stretch, whether it was the hand or not. And being injured, it was the decision-making that cost him a lot last year.
That, to me, is the biggest step that needs to be taken. Said it yesterday. It's like, if physical tools are there, like, yeah, okay, he's a little sidearm. Like, we can live with that. There's plenty of guys that have. To me, it's when to play hero ball, knowing when to hold them, knowing when to fold them. I need to try it here, not here. And that, to me, is the biggest step that needs to be taken. So how can you make those strides when – I guess you're kind of ingrained in your DNA to be a playmaker? How can you kind of take a step back and maybe say, maybe now is not the time to press the gas?
I think that's a great question. And here's the thing, guys, like I've written these stories, and, it kind of gives you an insight of John is doing everything he can this offseason to get better, which you love to hear, right? You love that he's working on his mechanics. He's trying to improve his fundamentals. He's living in the film room. He's trying to understand, reading defenses and understanding coverages and, routes and everything that goes into being a quarterback. But until we see it on the field, right, it's hard to believe that he's actually going to improve. I think the biggest thing for John is also just trusting those guys around him. I think so many times last year, they had 3 freshmen starting on the offensive line for him last year. I'm not so sure he trusted his offensive line at times. And so he was bailing out of the pocket early, or he wasn't planting his feet the right way, or he was just a half second hesitant on some of his decisions, which you can't be in that position. I think another thing that's really important to note, and I included this in my story yesterday as well, is I don't think John, you look back at his time at Washington State, and he was phenomenal in 2024. Well, part of the reason for that, and this was a narrative last year for John Mateer in Oklahoma as he came into the SEC, was he had never faced some of the defenses that he faced last year. At Washington State, he faced only 2 top 50 defenses in S&P Plus. Washington, which was 36th, and Boise State, that was 50th. Last year in the SEC, he faced 8 top 32 defenses in S&P Plus. I want to say half of those were top 15 defenses in the country. So part of the reason that we saw him struggle last year wasn't just because of the hand injury, wasn't because he needs to work on just his decision making. He was just facing a lot better competition. And I think here in Oklahoma, we just kind of swept that under the rug and said, well, they'll figure it out. He's a great player, and he was really good early in the year. We all remember the Michigan game. But clearly, as time went on, I think facing those defenses really exposed him at times. And now you just have to hope that experience this past year can improve it.
We're visiting with George Stoia, worked for On3, covers Oklahoma, and we're talking about some of the write-ups that he's had on John Mateer and some of the things he's doing this offseason. You mentioned Ben Arbuckle there briefly. What can he do, and what conversations have you heard about this offseason about him maybe calling things a little bit different, setting things up a little bit differently to help with John Mateer's decision-making this upcoming season?
Well, first, they got to be able to run the football. They ranked 113th last year in rushing offense, and that was part of the problem. John Mateer had, I want to say, the second highest usage rate of any quarterback in the country last year, which that's not always a good thing. You don't want your quarterback to have to be the entire offense. And as bad as John was at times, he was also usually the reason why Oklahoma was scoring the ball. It was kind of a roller coaster of, if Oklahoma was moving the ball up and down the field, it's because John Mateer found a way. And so I think Ben Arbuckle has to be able to find a way to take some off his shoulders. And, I think that starts with running the football. And one thing that was talked a lot about this spring is Oklahoma's going to go under center more, which we just haven't seen in Oklahoma in a long time, going under center, handing the ball off, running play action. They just gave Kevin Wilson, who longtime offensive coordinator, was at Oklahoma, then was at Ohio State as the offensive coordinator. Now he's back at Oklahoma as an offensive analyst. He's way more involved this year than he was last year. They just gave him, $500,000 raise, which indicates to me, hey, this guy's going to be a lot more involved in, he's not going to be calling the plays, but what they're doing schematically, I do think Kevin Wilson will have some say. And you look at his history, it's a lot of outside zone and going under center, pounding the football, different types of run schemes, GT counter and things of that nature, which Bill Beatenbow, the offensive line coach, has become well known for. They've gotten away from that in recent years, and I think that they're going to get back to it. And I think that they're hoping that can equal success. And you look at like what Indiana did last year, and I'm not saying Oklahoma's just going to go out there and replicate what Indiana did offensively, but I do think there's a recipe for success where, Fernando Mendoza was awesome for Indiana, but their bread and butter was running the football and being able to turn around and hand it off, 20, 30 times a game if you have to. And Oklahoma just couldn't do that. One, because the running backs just weren't very good at times. They had a young offensive line. And I think the scheme as well is very quarterback dependent. So I do think Ben Arbuckle has spent this offseason kind of looking at what they're doing offensively and maybe changing some things up.
So looking at the supporting cast, because I'm of belief that last year's supporting cast was a bit underwhelming. I think Satania was amazing. And the offensive line was inconsistent. I thought the running backs were inconsistent. I thought Kanik, for whatever reason, disappeared after the first 4 games. I'm not sure why that happened. But Burke, I thought, was kind of underwhelming. I thought that they had some injuries in some spots that you thought they'd have a chance. So how would you say the overall supporting cast is going to look around Mateer this year?
I think it'll look better. And I think a lot of what you're saying is correct, because last year, by the end of the year, it was the John Mateer and Isaiah Satania show. And if those guys didn't show up, Oklahoma wasn't going to score the football. And, we saw some glimpses from an Xavier Robinson at running back who, had a great game against Ole Miss, which they ended up losing, but he was really the only offense there. But then he ends up getting hurt at the end of the season and just wasn't the same player there in the playoff. Torrey Blaylock, the freshman running back, same thing. He was banged up, and both those guys are back. You hope that those guys can be their full healthy selves. And if they are, then I think they can be good players for you, but it's a big if. You've got a couple freshman running backs and Jonathan Hatton and DeZephin Walker that they're really high on, but they're freshmen. Can they step up? And then at wide receiver, I think that's where people are most excited, at least here in Norman, is you bring in Terrell Harris from Virginia, an all ACC type of player, 800-something yards, veteran guy, been around college football for forever. You hope that he can be a really good possession receiver for you. You bring in Parker Livingston from Texas, who had a really good year last year for the Longhorns and just brings a lot of size, 6'4", big-bodied guy, can go up and catch the football. Oklahoma didn't have that last year. Didn't have somebody that could go up and just get a big jump ball. So they hope that he can. And then you bring back Isaiah Satania, who's one of the fastest and more electric wide receivers in college football. So you hope that those are all better. And then you have the tight end group, which they just didn't have a tight end last year. You mentioned Jaron Kanik. He played technically tight end. He was listed as a tight end, but he was 6'2", 220. He was more of a big slot receiver type of player. And he had moments where he was really good, and then he disappeared. Like you said, this year they have, Hayden Hansen, who was a 4-year starter or 3-year starter for Florida, 6'7", 270 pounds. I don't think he's going to be a huge threat in the passing game. Maybe in the red zone, we see him a lot, but certainly I think he can help in the run game. And that's one reason why Oklahoma couldn't run the ball last year, is they couldn't block anybody on the edge at tight end. So you bring him in, you bring in Rocky Beers from Colorado State, another big-bodied wide receiver, Jack Van Doorsealer from Tennessee. You bring him in at tight end. So they feel like they've surrounded John with a lot more talent than maybe they had a year ago. And I think on paper, it certainly looks like the most talented roster Brent Venables has had in his tenure. The problem is they also face one of the most difficult schedules in the country. So I think Oklahoma could be an improved football team, and I think they'll be improved around John Mateer. I don't know if that necessarily means Oklahoma's going to win 10 games again, because they have to go on the road to Michigan, on the road to Georgia, Texas and Dallas. You get A&M and Ole Miss at home. You finish the season with Missouri on the road. Like it's a really difficult path. So it makes this Oklahoma team, I think, one of the more interesting teams, because I do think they're better than they were a year ago, at least on paper. But I don't know if that means that they're going to be in the college football playoff again.
You can find George's work as he joins us on the Higginbotham Hotline on the On3 Sports Network at Sooner Scoop, at George Stoia, Stoia. Follow him on Twitter. You mentioned the Sam Bradford situation a little bit earlier. Can you take us further into how that happened? What happened with that for him to begin working with Mateer this offseason?
Yeah, it's a fun story, because I don't know how much you guys know Sam Bradford or have talked to him, but he's a really quiet guy. He's not necessarily someone who wants to be out in the public. And I'll even tell you guys, I'm not so sure he wanted this story to be written at first. And I got him to do the interview and obviously got the green light on that. But like, he's very much a behind the scenes type of guy, and he loves Oklahoma. He lives here in Oklahoma City still. And he started to kind of get back around the program when Brent Venables was hired. Obviously they go back. Brent was the defensive coordinator when Sam was the quarterback in Oklahoma. So he's been around the program a little bit more. And he started to get to know John last year, went out to a couple practices, watched him from a distance. Sam goes to every OU game, and after the season just reached out and said, hey, let's grab dinner. And they started chatting. And I think John asked him, like, hey, would you want to come up to the facility sometime and just, can I pick your brain, basically? Can we watch some film together? And it sounds like they turned on the film of John's season this last year and sat there and studied several times. I don't think this was just a one-time deal. I think that they've met together multiple times and kind of looked at film. And Sam, when he played at Oklahoma and even in the NFL, he was considered one of the highest IQ quarterbacks out there and a pure passer and all of those things. And I think Sam even gave him some tips on his mechanics. But I think Sam also was able to kind of give him some different perspective on just reading defenses, understanding coverages, and things of that nature. So kind of a really cool relationship, especially for OU fans to hear about, because Sam, again, is not someone that is like Baker Mayfield, who's just kind of always out there and doing something and talking about how much he loves OU. Sam is very much behind the scenes, kind of lives in his own world, has a place up in Wyoming that I think he kind of escapes to in the off season. And we don't hear much from him, and we don't see him on the big screen or on TV, being at OU games or at OU events. So to hear him kind of give back to the university, I think is a pretty cool thing for Oklahoma fans.
George, we appreciate the time today, man. Great stuff. Great insight. Thanks for hopping on, and we'll do it again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
There you go. George Stoia covers Oklahoma for the On3 Sports Network at George Stoia, George Stoia. Follow him on Twitter. A couple good write-ups just on Mateer's offseason, what he's been doing, how he's been working, what's going to change, what could be different, and why. And working with Sam Bradford could be one. If he does take a big step, make big improvement, who would be joining him from the SEC? Biggest jumps for SEC quarterbacks. Who potentially could that be? We'll discuss it next right here on Jocks.
Go inside Jocks 94.5 on Jocks TV. Morning Jocks, Mac and Cube, three-man front video simulcasts are presented by Bill Smith Buick GMC and Game Day Men's Health. Watch on the Jocks mobile app and YouTube by searching Jocks 94.5 TV.